like it's going to be a battle between three teams: the Rams, the 49ers, and the Cardinals. Who's going to win the NFC West and who's going to win the rest of the divisions? More after this.
Let's go get him. Let's go get him today, man. Let's go. Hey, dominate on three. 1, 2, 3. Dominate.
What's going on, everybody? I'm here again with another video. We've got a good friend of mine, Neil Shaw, here with us. Neil, how you doing today, man?
Great. Thank you for having me on.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I mean, it's kind of like in a way the dead period of the offseason, but we did get some bit of news this past week because on Thursday the NFL schedule released for all teams, the full 18-week schedule. So we now know kind of where everyone's playing, although we already knew the opponents and stuff. So
Yeah,
today we're going to be talking about the NFL divisions, and we're going to see where we rank each team very early in the season.
definitely. And even to continue on that while the schedule release, signings are still going on. This morning, the Dolphins signed Melvin Ingram, who did kind of have a down year last year, but turned things up for the Chiefs, and I expect him to have a big impact for that Dolphins kind of anchor in terms of a defense that is really strong, and one that can build off the offensive weapons that they've added, and continue to develop this offseason.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, just quickly talking about the Dolphins, right? Obviously, they have a strong secondary with the duo of Xavier Howard, one of the top cornerbacks in the NFL, and Byron Jones, who they signed to that 5-year, $82 million deal a couple of off seasons ago. They had rookie Javon Holland be a solid contributor last year
Yep.
at the safety position. So you have a good, what do you call it? You have a good core back there. With pass rush, I know they run a 3-4, so you might focus on the outside linebackers. Emmanuel Ogba had a hell of a season last year,
Hmm.
signed a 4-year, $65 million extension this year. Pretty solid, what do you call it, linebacker core. So what are you focusing on? You're focusing on more pass rush, and that is exactly what Melvin Ingram kind of brings to that team, especially with the veteran leadership that they're trying to do with the new head coach, so new culture, trying to get that leadership back there with that defense.
Exactly, and in an AFC that just saw an influx of weapons, both offensively and defensively, you're gonna rely on some of these big time vets to kind of have leadership and really introduce some of their more unique, I guess, characteristics, such that you can get that one stop, so that you can bring your offense on the field, and especially with the new offense with McDaniels, and you bring in Tyreek, and you're kind of gonna run this RPO, or continue to run this RPO scheme with Tua in there. You're gonna see the Dolphins kind of reinsert themselves from being that 10-7, 9-9 team to kind of maybe even being a 12 and 16, 12 and or 13 and 5 team.
And let's start there because the AFC East, has somewhat of a competition because I think all four teams are looking at least in an upward trend going into 2022. The Buffalo Bills, they are obviously one of the strongest teams in the entirety of the NFL on both sides of the field. The Patriots made the playoffs last year with a rookie quarterback. Obviously, you expect them to improve as well. Then the Dolphins, like a significant amount of additions this year,
Right.
headlined by Tyreek Hill, but they've got a good amount of players, Teron Armstead as well, over there on the offensive line. So where do you think those four teams in the AFC East kind of rank up?
So I think this is honestly one of the most interesting divisions. But it's interesting in the latter three half of the teams. I do think the Bills take this division pretty easily. They bring back one of a really strong defense, along with a ton of different picks in the draft. But if you look at those bottom three teams, two of them are on the rise, and I think one really steadied out and kind of plateaued this offseason. The two that are on the rise are Miami, obviously, as we talked about them a bit earlier. But I do like the Jets in the position that they put themselves after this offseason. While I don't see them going over 6 wins, I think Robert Sala really solidifies himself and gets them where they need to be, both offensively and defensively. If you look at offensively, it's all centered around quarterback development. I think this is Zach Wilson's prove it or get out year. because there's a really strong quarterback class incoming in the next year, and they could go with those a top 3 pick and go get a CJ Stroud or a Bryce Young. But they bring together a ton of young weapons along with the weapons they already have. If you look at their pass rush, they already have Quinnen Williams. They bring in Jermaine Johnson, and while he did slip in the draft, I still thought he was a top 3 pass rusher coming in. If you look at the offensive weapons they bring in Breece Hall and they bring in Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson's the top pass catcher from this draft, and Breece Hall was one of the top running backs, if not the best, the past collegiate season. So I look at a team where you have so many young weapons, and it's all centered around the development of these players and how they really settle into Zach Wilson, and see if they can kind of extend the field, bring back some of the long passes that he did at BYU, and kind of reincorporate himself with strong slot wide receivers, and then bring in Garrett Wilson. On the defensive side, obviously, decent pass rush. Sauce Gardner does a lot for them as a press corner, but they do still lack the defensive capabilities to really take over in this division. If you look at the Patriots, well, the Patriots are interesting. Mac Jones, good quarterback, but he's a game manager, and we'll see what they do with him going into this next year. It's not a prove it year for him. He kind of did prove himself last year, but they do lose JC Jackson on the defensive end. They lose a couple other vets on the defensive end that really takes them out from competing in big games with the Bills like they did last season. And they didn't really do anything offensively, in my opinion. Yes, they got in a couple players from the draft, but if I look at who are my worst draft teams, the Patriots are one. I think the Cole Strange pick was really interesting, and I think we saw that from a couple of the reactions of the Rams personnel saying, "Oh, we were looking at him at 104." Well, yeah, you probably were looking at him 104 because he was supposed to be taken there. But you see Belichick with all these interesting moves. I think the Patriots really plateaued this offseason, and it's one of those uh, incoming seasons where it's like, well, we don't know if we're going to do well. We might do well. Let's see where this takes us.
Yeah, I think what you said was very fair. And I mean, obviously, the team that kind of had a very, very, in a way, maybe not optimistic, but a very, very eventful offseason was the New York Jets. When you look at like them and their team, you hope that they're kind of prized for some sort of success this year.
Right.
But then you look at their schedule, and you have to temper expectations a bit because they start the year playing Baltimore, Cleveland, and Cincinnati, all in the first 3 weeks of the year. All 3 teams who are expected to be playoff contenders if Deshaun Watson obviously plays this year. All expected to be playoff contenders. So really, it's a tough start to the schedule. They also have games against Green Bay and Denver later in the
Yeah.
year. Minnesota should be also a playoff contender this year. So you have a good amount of teams that really don't. While you want to give advantage to the Jets, it is a tough schedule to overcome. So you're right. I
Right.
don't expect them to at least have a winning record this year, but you do expect them to have a step up from last year in terms of competitiveness. Maybe not necessarily the
Of
outcome,
course.
but competitiveness. When you look
Of
at the
course,
Dolphins,
competitiveness. Yep.
mhm.
Definitely. I agree with that.
Yeah, when you look at the Dolphins, right? Obviously, they improved offensively. Teron Armstead is a pretty good bring from at the left tackle position. You bring in Tyreek Hill to complement Jalen Waddle, and then also bring in Cedric Wilson at the wide receiver position. So you have a pretty strong wide receiver core now. Additionally, we talked about the addition of Melvin Ingram on defense, but to me, I think their offensive line is still somewhat of an issue. Tua Tagovailoa, one of the better passers with a clean pocket. But again, that offensive line, apart from Armstead, didn't improve this year. Connor Williams led the league in holds last year, and he's sliding in at the left guard position. Austin Jackson is still a bit of an unknown. And then really the right side of their offensive line is a bit of a struggle at the moment. Michael Dieter, Robert Hunt, and Leon Eichenberg. And that's the problem, given that that's Tua's blind side. So it is a little bit of a question mark for that portion. And that's why I think the Dolphins might not have as astronomical of a jump as we'd expect them to have, although they should be fairly competitive just because of how like the new scheme will revolve around running, which they made a significant investment in this year with Chase Edmonds,
Yeah.
Mostert, and Sonny Michel. So I think that should help them a bit. especially running behind Teron Armstead. But that's the team where I'm very interested. Will they eclipse the
Mhm.
Patriots, or will they remain in third place this year? But I agree with your expectation that the Bills should win this division. They're one of the
Yeah,
strongest teams in football.
I think they take it pretty comfortably too.
Yeah. Let's move on to the AFC North. We've got four teams there, one of the more competitive divisions last year, where all teams were pretty much in the race until the last couple of weeks. Now, obviously, there's some uncertainty regarding Deshaun Watson's situation, but what do you expect out of this division in 2022?
So last year in August, I was at a restaurant with my friends, and we were looking at, I think their Sports Center was on or something, and they're talking about the AFC North, and I think it was Dan Orlovsky speaking, and he was like, "Well, the Browns have the best roster," and I kind of looked towards one of my friends, and I'm like, "The Bengals are taking this division. I don't know if they're going to go further in the playoffs, but I know this year they're going to take this division." And I saw Joe Burrow a lot in college. I'm a big Alabama football fan for all your viewers out there, so I saw a lot of Joe Burrow. I knew what he was capable of, and I think he was one of the best first round picks in recent history, and it directly translated to what he was able to do in the NFL despite the two tears on his leg. But if I look at this division, it's definitely competitive. I'll start at the bottom. I do think while the Steelers boast probably the best defense in football, um, their offense, I just don't know. Kenny Pickett, this obviously wasn't a strong class for quarterbacks. Kenny Pickett, there's been a lot of critiques about his hand size, about his vision. He played with a really strong wide receiver play um, in college, but he also played in a weaker ACC, in which even that year Clemson wasn't as good as advertised. So I look at the Pittsburgh Steelers, and a defense can only get you so far. I do think they need some type of scoring, and while I do see an improvement from last year and a great utilization of Najee Harris again this year, um, every single one of the teams improved in the AFC North. They also improved. They are a riser from where I look at from the draft standpoint, but I still do see them finishing fourth. Now, when we get to 1 to 3, um, lots of confusion there. Honestly, it's extremely hard to predict. I have the Bengals finishing first again. They improved their offensive line, which was kind of where I saw, and I think where everyone saw, especially with the poor Super Bowl performance, where the Bengals need to prove. They get a few reinforcements on the line, but I do think it's enough for Joe Burrow, at least right now. While I don't see them going to the Super Bowl again, they win this division not comfortably. I do think it comes down to a few divisional games at the end of the year. But Joe Burrow takes this division. They're really going to improve. I think Jamar Chase, while he won't have as well of the year as he had last year, I think he grows as a person, and you're going to see some sort of leadership from him because this is a very young team, especially from a quarterback and skill position uh, like group. But Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and I think Joe Mixon being healthy is really key for them. Now, if you look at the Browns and the Ravens, there are two scenarios that play out for the Browns. Deshaun Watson healthy, Deshaun Watson not healthy. If Deshaun Watson's healthy and he finds a connection with Amari Cooper, I think that's latter half is extremely important for me. And they're still able to utilize the strong backfield with Chubb and Hunt. And if that happens, I know their defensive personnel is really good with Miles Garrett, Denzel Ward, and their emerging linebackers. I do think that they have a chance at this division. I don't think it's enough, but Deshaun Watson is a major upgrade from Baker Mayfield, who caught a lot of the hate for how they played towards the end of the year last year. Now, if Deshaun Watson doesn't play, well, I do think Baker Mayfield steps in. I don't see an improvement from last year. You look at the Ravens. The Ravens are getting all their running backs back this year. Dobbins and Gus Edwards are going to lead that backfield along with Lamar Jackson. I expect them to kind of improve from where they were last year. Obviously, they had a ton of quarterback issues. Huntley stepped in towards the end of the year, but if I see Lamar Jackson taking a step forward, I see them becoming an even better run first team. But they do kind of stay where they are in terms of the pass game. I'm a big fan of Rashad Bateman. However, I don't think he feels the need as a wide receiver one. They do utilize their tight ends really well. Mark Andrews, Nick Boyle, and they drafted another tight end in the draft in Kolar. But they don't see much improvement in the pass game. On the defensive side, Humphrey's back, Peters back, strong, strong, strong secondary. You see Hamilton really fill in some of the needs in terms of downfield passing, especially when you look at the AFC in terms of heavy hitters, Herbert, Allen, Mahomes. You see some of that patched up. And then I think one of the biggest things that they got this draft was Ojabo. Even though he's coming off an Achilles tear, I do think that he's going to be a big piece for them in the pass rush game. He complemented Hutchinson really well, but I do think that that kind of translates into the AFC North. So if I had to pick, it would be Bengals, Ravens, Browns, and Steelers.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, looking at the teams, the Ravens should see like just in terms of talent because they were so injured last year. You have I'd be interested to see offensively if they run three tight end sets, have Kolar, Isaiah Likely in the slot, and then Mark Andrews as well as a third tight end because obviously they look to enhance that position over the wide receiver position after trading Marquise Brown on day one of the
Right.
draft. But defensively, they improved significantly with the addition of Marcus Williams. He's essentially their free safety, their coverage safety. And I thought that that would have been the best place for Kyle Hamilton to go because he could utilize his skills in the box, utilize his range, his instinct, and not have to worry necessarily about certain coverage issues. And so that's why I think it's going to be a great place for him. Pretty solid safety tandem, and then obviously a great cornerback tandem with Humphrey and Peters. Jalen Armour Davis probably plays in the slot this year.
Yep.
Peters is also coming back from injury. So you have a pretty strong defense. The pass rush should be there with the Dafe Owe and Tyus Bowser. Calais Campbell and Michael Pierce are still there on the interior. So it'll be a pretty strong team. Offensively, I thought they improved their offensive line with Kevin Zietler and Tyler Linderbaum. They retained Ronnie Stanley, added Morgan Moses instead of Alejandro Villanueva. And then, yeah, you got a healthy running back room. So this should be a pretty strong team to compete. The Bengals didn't significantly get worse. Instead, they did the opposite. Like you said, the offensive line, they added Ted Karras at center, Alex Capel at right guard, and Lyle Collins at right tackle. So their
Right.
entirety of their right side of the offensive line is improving this year. Defensively, they kind of kept the group together, and they also added a good amount of players in the draft in Daxton Hill. They got Tyson Anderson out of Toledo as well, and then they got another safety that is coming off, or that I'm forgetting immediately. But they got three pretty strong. Cam Taylor Britt, that's who was the cornerback safety out of Nebraska. So you got a pretty strong secondary there, which kind of was somewhat of an issue last year, especially with Eli Apple in coverage. So I think that yeah, they shouldn't necessarily see a significant regression, although normally you do see some regression from teams that succeed that heavily in years past.
Right.
So that's there. Cleveland is obviously determined on Deshaun Watson. I think that that's important. Their wide receiver group isn't that strong anymore. Obviously, they lose Beckham in the middle of last year. They lose Jarvis Landry to free, or they cut him. They got Amari Cooper in return. He's going to be their absolute wide receiver number one. They kept David Njoku, franchise tagged him, so he's their tight end number one. But the rest of the wide receiver group is somewhat unproven. Donovan Peoples-Jones, David Bell, and then return specialist Jakeem Grant. So that's the bit of an issue. But their defense is pretty strong as well as their offensive line. So they should be a pretty heavy run first team. And then Pittsburgh, it's kind of like a reset year. At quarterback, we don't know if Pickett or Trubisky will start, but the remainder of their roster is improving. Wide receivers, now they have three with the addition of George Pickens in the draft. Defense, like you said, is one of the stronger ones. They were able to retain Terrell Edmonds in free agency. So it's really how is their offense going to hold up? Because over the past years, in Ben Roethlisberger's kind of later years in his career, the offense hasn't done as well as you'd like them to do to compete for a playoff spot. But with that said, they still made the playoffs last year as the seventh seed. Who knows if Kenny Pickett or Trubisky really takes a step forward and elevates their play over what they saw from Roethlisberger last year? Who knows? We may see it, although it's unlikely given how strong the AFC is this year.
Definitely.
Let's move on to the AFC South. I guess it might be one of the least competitive divisions in this in the entirety of the AFC. Obviously, you have the Titans, the Colts, but then you also have the Texans in that division, as well as the Jacksonville Jaguars, of course. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I think it's a two-man race or two-team race. I'll start with the bottom actually. So I have Jacksonville and kind of Houston competing for, I guess, the worst team in the NFL this year. They're both going to finish bottom two, in my opinion, and I don't think they take big steps from last year. Jacksonville is a really broken organization right now, and it's not going to take 1 year to fix it. You're not going to get a magical Trevor Lawrence to fix it because clearly even he didn't fix it. So what we're going to see is again a transitional year, new coach coming in, and if we think bigger picture, I think Rashid Khan looks to sell the team in a couple of years, change up ownership at a top level, and that kind of trickles down towards the rest of the organization. I don't see big steps from any of their players. I think they really went with a wild card at the number one overall with Devontae White. He wasn't the best player on that defense in Georgia last year. He has incredible upside, but with all defensive players, it's scheme, it's how they go from college to the NFL in terms of build, in terms of IQ, in terms of athleticism. And it's honestly matchup based too. If he's going up against the best players, he's obviously going to look the worst. If the Jaguars are able to utilize him like he was utilized by Kirby Smart's defense in Georgia, I think maybe he does compete for some type of defensive rookie of the year award. But Jacksonville isn't going anywhere this year. They're staying at the bottom. The Texans are similar. Davis Mills is a really good quarterback. I do think he was one of the top quarterbacks last year, and I think he played well at Stanford and he made a jump in the NFL. However, they aren't going to do as well as people think they are. I don't think the jump that he makes is that drastic. I do think Brandon Cooks staying gives him a lot more, I guess, confidence to do better. He's always got that target in his back pocket that he can reach to, but their defense is really, really bad. And if I look at both Jacksonville and Houston, neither of those teams popped up in my radar for either competing for one of the best teams out of the draft or teams on the rise or even the worst teams. They were kind of right in the middle where they had a few good picks, they had a few bad picks, and they may get a gem out of one of those players, but you're going to see that gem have to be developed over time. We'll talk about the top two teams now. The Titans do finish second in this division. Derrick Henry does have a resurgence here. I do think he contends for the MVP once again. They lose AJ Brown. Even though that was a bad decision on their part, I guess their kind of draft team saw something very similar in Treylon Burks. I saw him play for Arkansas a lot this past season. I do think he's really good. But then reports have come out, and I know it's really early in spring camp, but he hasn't looked the part like he did in Arkansas. Um, but we're going to see in the future if he's able to be utilized in a Debo Samuel role or maybe even an AJ Brown like downfield passing role. It's going to be really interesting to see how they use him. Their defense is there. They had one of the best pass rush in all of football last year. I do think that continues, but the Colts, with the addition of Matt Ryan, ascend them to being the best in the AFC South. Jonathan Taylor is going to have another great year. Their offensive line will be completely healthy, and their defense picked up a few great players, but they also did lose a couple players, a cornerback to the Niners. But we're gonna see kind of the Colts look to really handle this division in the first 6 weeks of football.
Yeah, I think those are interesting observations. Obviously, the bottom two teams, you have the Jaguars and the Texans. The one problem that I see with both of them schedule wise, they face pretty tough opponents. I think they both face a majority of the AFC West. I think they both face the Chargers and the Chiefs, which obviously doesn't bode well for their futures. Jacksonville obviously spent a good amount in free agency. Christian Kirk on a crazy deal, 4 year, 82 million. But you also have other pieces like Shaquille Griffin, Darius Williams, who they paid a 3 year deal to. And so it's an interesting team. Obviously, you're looking for the emergence of Trevor Lawrence to try and improve from last year. But to me, their offensive line really didn't get that as stronger. Obviously, they brought in Brandon Sheriff, another guy on a 3 year deal, but they have questions at the left guard spot. At center, Luke Fortner, he's a rookie. We don't know how exactly he'll play. And Jawan Taylor hasn't been exactly spectacular at the right tackle position. So I think that Offensive line still might be a bit of an issue as it was last year, although to a lesser extent. On the defensive side, you have Josh Allen, and then, like I said, you have a pretty strong secondary now. You hope that they'll improve, but again, they're young, so you want to see what you can do from them. But you probably expect a third or a fourth place finish from them. And then the other team competing for that bottom spot is the Houston Texans, another team with a young quarterback in Davis Mills. They have Brandon Cooks, like you said, but their wide receiver group is worse, one of the worst in the NFL, because you have young, unproven players in Mechie and Nico Collins, probably that slot in at 2 and 3. Brevin Jordan, another young player at the tight end position. At the offensive line, they addressed it with Kenyon Green. Hopefully that improves it. They still have AJ Khan over there at right guard. So while it looks like it'll be a better offensive line this year, it is unknown at the moment. And so we'll see how that goes. Defensively, it's still a bit of a question mark. They lost Desmond King, or actually, sorry, they retained Desmond King, but they don't necessarily have the best pass rush. I think they'll probably contend for one of the worst pass rushes in the NFL this year. They have a pretty strong cornerback group, believe it or not, with Stingley, Nelson, and Desmond King. But at the safety position, it is a bit of uncertainty. Colts and Titans should contend for the top 2 spots in this division. Like in the past couple of years, the divisional games between the two have kind of dictated that, but we'll see how it changes this year. Matt Ryan should be not a significant, but at least a meaningful upgrade over Carson Wentz, who did not perform to expectation last year. And so both teams, the Colts have a pretty balanced team. The Titans also have a pretty balanced team with a little more young talent. We'll see which one comes up on top.
Definitely agree.
The strongest division in football is the AFC West. Both Wests are really the strongest divisions for each conference. What do you think about this division and where teams end up?
You look at all 4; they're all heavy hitters. I think it's really hard to predict what happens, but there's only about 2 things I'm kind of certain on. I'm certain on the Chiefs winning this division. They're kind of one of those regular season teams, much like the Packers, that kind of hold it down, even through some struggles. And I do think they take this division. They do lose a really big piece in Tyreek Hill that takes away not only downfield capabilities but sideline to sideline capabilities in terms of running an offense that way. The running back core, I think, is one of the weakest in football, in my opinion. I wasn't a big fan of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but I don't know. Maybe he can be something. Mahomes really doesn't like to check down too much. He prefers to scramble and kind of find the Tyreek or the Kelsey downfield. But we'll see where they are. I do think that they had a bad offseason in terms of the pieces they lost. They lose Tyrann Mathieu, who was their anchor on defense, and we kind of saw what the defense looked like when he wasn't there. You saw the Bills tear them up. And then you look at offensively, obviously, losing Tyreek Hill. I do still think, just because of the brilliance of Patrick Mahomes, they win this division. Another thing I'm certain on is the Chargers not making the playoffs. I do think Justin Herbert will actually finish his career as one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever fill the stat chart. This guy's crazy at putting up yards. He's crazy in terms of touchdowns. He, for the most part, keeps his interceptions low. And here's the thing with the Chargers. They have a ton of skill players. They just haven't converted to wins. Their defense got several improvements with Khalil Mack and J.C. Jackson, along with Derwin James being healthy again this year. I just don't see them winning. I do think that having a veteran presence at the quarterback position, which all 3 other teams have in this division, is really important. And while Justin Herbert continues to grow, it's just I've seen back-to-back years in which they fall short every single year. So at what point can I be certain and say, well, this is the year? You can only hope that it's going to be the year. And with the Chargers, I kind of sit here and I am a skeptic of them, as I have been in the past 3 years. If I look at the Broncos, and I like where they are. Russell Wilson was a big addition for them. Their defense obviously solid, as it has been the past few years. Surtain is really good for them. But then again, I don't know if they had the best of best drafts. I think they're in that middle area as well. They pick up a couple key players, but in the long run, I only see maybe one being even um, it kind of being a gem. If we look at offensively, I know Jerry Judy has run into a couple legal problems recently, but he was supposed to kind of emerge as their wide receiver one, and take a big step this year, especially with a really good quarterback. We'll see where they're at. Their offensive line is average. Their run game, I think Javonte Williams takes a big step forward as a power back and kind of emerges into a Nick Chubb type of role, as he possesses kind of all the athletic capabilities that Chubb does as well. But we'll see. Broncos are interesting. They've got to have, I think, a one more weapon to kind of contend with the Chiefs, but they'll be interesting. The Raiders, probably the best trio in football, possibly with Carr, um, kind of Carr, Waller and Devontae Adams. And one really, really interesting thing I thought they did this offseason was decline the option on Josh Jacobs. What they did was they declined that, but in the later rounds of the draft, I think they pick up a carbon copy of Josh Jacobs and Zamir White from Georgia. I think Zamir White's a really good power back, and it kind of fills the need that the Raiders need with the power back. However, I've always been a skeptic of the Raiders. Here's why. When they originally drafted Josh Jacobs came out of an Alabama backfield in which he was option number two. He was option number two as a pass catching back. Damian Harris was number one, as the run first back. And when he went to the Raiders, they drafted him really high because they kind of needed a power back. And yes, I see Josh Jacobs potentially being that power back, especially in his rookie year, but I don't think they utilized him well. And I think there's a lot to blame on what actually went wrong there, and I don't think they utilized him to his truest potential. Now I look at what they can use with Zabir White, and it fits their scheme really well. So you're going to see a lot of Devontae Adams, Derek Carr this year. It's going to become one of the best connections in football. If I look defensively, well, they're young. They're still young. They've had a lot of misses in the draft with multiple players just not panning out how they should be. And I think they did take a gamble on Max Crosby and paying him a lot of money this offseason. While, yes, he did have a very, very good year, I think there are a lot of one off players that have had very, very good years, and they may not have the same year that they have next year. While I don't think that'll happen with Max Crosby, I do think that he does take a step down from the production he was this year. Let's see their development of kind of their secondary continue to grow with a ton of strong young players, and I think they were. If I look at the teams in the draft, I do think that the players that they took kind of put them on the rise.
Yeah, I think those are all good points. And I mean, when you look at these four teams, right, I feel like all four of them, maybe except for the Chiefs, who many view as a pretty strong team, made significant improvements. The Raiders, obviously, with the addition of Devontae Adams to their wide receiver core, immediately slots in as number one, and he provides Hunter Renfrow kind of with a complement. They also got Demarcus Robinson, trying to unleash that potential there. All obviously they like speedsters, and their main guy is Darren Waller. I think their offensive
Right.
line is all right. It'll be very interesting to see where Alex Leatherwood plays in year one
Hmm.
and whether Dylan Parham starts or not. Defensively, I think
Exactly.
they did improve. They traded for Rocky Yassin, and they also signed a guy in Chandler Jones, which allowed
Yep.
them to trade for Yassin, trading Ngakwe to the Colts. And so now you have a combo of Mullen, Yassin, and Nate Hobbs over there defensively. Trayvon Morag was a pretty solid pick. We'll see if
Hmm.
Deron Harmon starts over Jonathan Abram this year. But regardless, it's a pretty strong group. Their linebacker core is pretty good as well, with Denzel Perriman, who was a Pro Bowler last year. The
Right.
Chargers obviously made some significant adjustments as well. Drafted Zion Johnson at number 17. Their main guy was J.C. Jackson, and they traded for Khalil Mack as well. So they should have a pretty formidable team on both sides. I think their most underrated signings were the ones of Sebastian Joseph Day and Austin Johnson, two defensive tackles, which should shore up their run game, which was one of the worst last year and really held them back from winning more games. I think that like their overall additions will really put them over the top this year. The Chiefs kind of took a step back. You don't know necessarily who's going to take over that wide receiver room. Will it be Smith Schuster? Will it be Valdez Scantling? Will it be the rookie Sky Moore? We don't know at
Hmm.
the moment, but their offensive line is strong. Their defense is still there. It's not the best necessarily, but it's still there, especially in the secondary where you have the guys like Trent McDuffie, L'Jarius Sneed, and Justin Reed,
Right.
all in primary roles over there. The Broncos obviously got Russell Wilson to pair with a pretty strong overall group, especially at the skill position. So with Sutton, Judy, Tim Patrick, one of the more underrated
Yep.
guys, and then KJ Hamler, a speed guy. Defensively, DJ Jones was added to that team, to a team that really wanted run help. DJ
Hmm.
Jones really provides that. So yeah, I do think that this should be one of the more competitive divisions.
100%.
Now for the NFC, let's do a little bit of a different exercise in a way. Why don't you tell me your 7 playoff teams for the NFC?
So if I had to think, I think there are a lot of intangibles, a lot of QB decisions, I guess, looking at the Niners specifically, that need to be made, development of players. But if I really had to look at it and break it down division by division, I do think Dallas makes the playoff this year. I think they have a very similar year to last year. Um, Out of the NFC North, I do see Green Bay making this division, and I think another intangible is Kirk Cousins being better. If he's better, the Vikings make the division. So I do think he's going to be better this year. So that's 3 teams right there. I think Tampa Bay makes the playoffs this year. I think New Orleans, if Michael Thomas resurges, they make the playoffs this year. That gives me 5 teams right there, and only 2 teams out of the NFC West. I am a big Niners fan. I don't see them making the playoffs this year. What I do have is Arizona and the Rams making the playoffs. The Seahawks are really one of the most irrelevant teams in football this year, but I do think that those 2 make it over the Niners. It'll be interesting to see Arizona versus the 49ers, and I think that matchup will really tell you, what's gonna happen there. Obviously, the health of players, if DeAndre Hopkins is healthy, if kind of Deebo Samuel is healthy, it's really gonna dictate where this season goes. But I do think that Dallas, Green Bay, Minnesota, both teams out of the NFC South, and the Saints and Bucks, and then the Cardinals and Rams make the playoffs.
That's very interesting, and especially the point you bring up about the Cardinals and Rams, because the 49ers and the Cardinals, both times that they played this year are in the second half of the season, week 11 in
Yeah,
Mexico at the neutral site, and then most importantly, week 18 at San
exactly.
Francisco. And I think that, yeah, like you said, the last 2 years, the 49ers, or the 2 years out of the last three, the 49ers have made the playoffs. It has gone down to that 18th game, right? Last year, to make the playoffs, they had to defeat the Rams at
Rams.
Levi's. They did it last year, or sorry, not at Levi's, at SoFi. They did it last year in,
Hmm.
I believe, week 18.
Yes,
Obviously, 27-24 to make the playoffs over the New Orleans Saints. In 2019, it was obviously the goal line stop against
of
the
course.
Seattle Seahawks that gave us the NFC number 1 seed, or sorry, they gave
Right.
us the number 1 seed in the bye. And so, yeah, those are the two, like obviously interesting games recently. So it should come down in a way to a very dramatic finish, especially because the 49ers finish against 2 strong teams in the Raiders and the Cardinals, who should be vying for a playoff spot at the time. And so, yeah, I do see that should come down in a way to the wire. I personally had it the other way because I think the 49ers will go either 10-7 or 11-6 this year. That's kind of my floor. Obviously, dependent on the quarterback situation. We don't know at the moment who it'll be, but given how it's been portrayed so far, to my knowledge, it should be Trey Lance. And
Yeah.
so that's where I do believe the 49ers will eventually end up making the playoffs. The one interesting thing before we end, you left off the Philadelphia Eagles from your list who made the playoffs last year. Why is that?
I've always been high on Jalen Hurts. I saw him in high school, loved him. And here's the thing with the Eagles. One, Jalen Hurts isn't the downfield passer that they need to win this division. I think Washington got semi of an upgrade in Carson Wentz. I've never been high on Wentz, but I do think that they do a lot better. Their defensive line buffed up even more, even though it's one of the best in football. They got even better. Um, Here's the thing with the Eagles: the division is competitive. The Giants are good too, especially if the Bull can turn Daniel Jones into even half of what Josh Allen is at Buffalo. If he does that, they become a lot better. You've got the resurgence of running backs. Antonio Gibson's going to be really good. Zeke, I think, will be good this year, and I do think Saquon returns back to kind of his former half of his career, in terms of the production levels that he was at. The Eagles lack this type of run game. While they do have a dynamic quarterback in Jalen Hurts, they will run, but at some point it won't get. They can't run into the playoffs. And if I look at their skill positions, AJ Brown, in my opinion, wasn't the best of the best pickups for them. While it does look really good on paper for them, AJ Brown's one of those downfield catchers. Jalen Hurts hasn't been that downfield passer. They haven't also uh, they also haven't actually um, kind of developed Devontae Smith into the route runner that he should be. Um, and I do think we'll see what they do in the future, but I think they honestly finish in the bottom half of this division, the bottom two teams. I think Dallas and New York take a big step this year in winning. And I know Surya commented that the Eagles did have a top five rushing attack last year. Yes, they did, but it also was at the expense of a passing game, and they didn't have that passing game that year. And I think that's one of the reasons they weren't able to compete with the Buccaneers in the playoffs. You really saw Jalen Hurts struggle against a really good run defense that was able to work the sidelines with two strong linebackers. That kind of took off any type of run game. And so if Jalen Hurts isn't able to make that next step, the Eagles don't make the playoffs.
That's fair. That's fair. And I mean, in a way, this is a prove-it year for Jalen Hurts, like it is for many other quarterbacks. Can he overcome the deficiencies that he's had in the past, specifically with accuracy? Obviously, when you look last year, Hurts threw for 31, I think it was 3,150 yards, somewhere around there. Only completed 61% of his passes in the 15 games that he played. So you do want him to kind of up it, even if the 40, or sorry, not the 49ers, the Eagles are a rushing attack in a way with the combination of Hurts, Sanders, and the remainder of that backfield that was pretty productive last year. So
And I think it's a prove it. Yeah, sorry to cut you off there. I think it is a prove it year for Miles Sanders as well. A lot of the skeptics for the Eagles last year had him not being utilized well. Let's see if they utilize him to his fullest potential this year. A couple of years ago, he was really good as a rookie. Now let's see what he took kind of a step back last year. Let's see what he does this year. And there are too many factors that could be yes or no, or on or off for the Eagles for me to definitively here say that they're going to make the playoffs. And if there were less factors, yeah, I would maybe say that it is a strong likelihood that would make the playoffs. But their division improved. They kind of, I don't even know if they improved, to be honest, just because they got weapons that didn't utilize Jalen Hurts' strengths. They probably should have beefed up the offensive line even more, and kind of built depth back there too. Just because I know they have been one of the most injured teams in football in a past few years, and they should have gone out and kind of made a couple more improvements on the defensive end. But we'll see. Eagles are an interesting team, definitely one of NFL's most interesting teams. So kind of we'll see where they're at this year. It's an
Yeah,
interesting team to watch.
definitely. This was a great episode, Neil. I had a lot of fun. Guys, we broke down the entirety of the NFL, the AFC, who we had as playoff teams, and the NFC. Be sure to check out Neil. Neil, do you have anything you want to shout out for yourself?
No, I just thank you for having me on, Rohan. You run a great podcast here, and I've kind of been following your content for a while. So thank you for having me on, and hope all is well in the future.
Most definitely. Guys, stay tuned. We've got a pretty busy slate this week coming up with content. On Monday, tomorrow, I am going live with Rob Shu tomorrow on his channel. Be sure to check that out. We'll be back tomorrow, and have a good weekend.